Monohybrid and dihybrid inheritance. We receive our genetic material from our parents. This genetic material is stored in the form of chromosomes. These are made from very tightly coiled DNA strands. A section of these chromosomes codes for particular traits, such as our eye color, whether you can roll your tongue. These are called genes. We inherit a copy of a gene from both our parents. For example, my mother has blue eyes, while my father has hazel eyes. I will have received instructions from my mother for how to make blue eyes and from my father how to make hazel eyes. It's a little bit like each parent having a recipe book and both of them giving you a recipe for chocolate cake. One might be a mud cake and one might be a sponge cake. They're both still for chocolate cake. They're just alternative versions of the same recipe. This is what we call alleles. They're alternative versions of a gene. Monohybrid Punnett squares is when we look at the inheritance of a single trait, such as eye color. Let's take for this example. Blue eye color is a recessive trait. That means it will only show up if there are no dominant traits or alleles present. Brown eye color is a dominant trait. It will show up if there is a dominant allele present. So that means in order to have blue eyes, I must have two recessive alleles. We indicate this with two lowercase letters. To have brown eyes, I could have an uppercase and a lowercase, so that means a dominant and a recessive allele, or I could have two dominant alleles. If we look at crossing two parents, so one with blue eyes, two lowercase recessives, and a brown-eyed parent who's got a dominant and a recessive, would first start by putting the alleles from the first parent in one column. These are the two alleles that they can pass on to their offspring. We would then put in the possible alleles that the second parent could pass on. Finally, we would then work out the 4 possible combinations that their offspring could inherit. From this, we can then calculate the genotype and phenotype ratios. The genotype is the genes that the individual might have. So in this case, there are 2 possible genotypes that this cross produced. The phenotype is the physical expression of the trait. So what does it actually look like in the person or the individual which inherited these genes? So in our case, it ends up with a 1-to-1 ratio of blue to brown eyes. This is a monohybrid cross. There are 2 important rules to keep in mind. First of all, the dominant and recessive alleles for a trait is assigned 1 letter. It's the same letter, it's just an uppercase or lowercase. So in the case of blue eyes or tongue roller, just as we've seen before. The second one is to remember to put the capital letters first.